Hello, my name is Frederik Steinmetz and welcome to my tutorial for aetutsplus.com labeled Basic Scripting. First I'll hit the tilde key to get this into full screen mode, and let me just begin with a little gray and dull theory. I'm sorry for that, but I think it's necessary in order to understand what I'm talking about, or what I'll be demonstrating. Okay, first we need to know what variables are. Variables are containers that store information and can be altered and recalled later on. There's a couple of types of variables, and the most common one is the number. The number, of course, can be used to control the opacity or position or the number of particles in any given layer. And the second one, in After Effects, it's still used, but it's less important. It's the string. A string variable will contain text. And what happens, for example, if we want to store the position of a layer in variables? Of course, the position contains both an x and a y component, so it's multidimensional. For that, we need containers that are able to store several variables. And those containers are called arrays. An array can consist of as many variables as you want. Most commonly is 2 or 3, because, for example, the position would have an x, a y, and a z position. So if we want to address those positions separately, we could, for example, create an array that's called mypos, and the position x would be stored at mypos 0. This is very important to remember, that the first piece of the array is always stored at position 0. And then, of course, position y would be mypos 1, and position z would be mypos 2. What happens if we want to address the different pieces of the array individually? For example, we want to address the x position, then it would be position 0. We'll name it time. Time is stored in After Effects. It means 1 per second. So if we have a layer with this expression for its position, then the layer would crawl across the screen with 1 pixel per second. And for the position y, position 1, we'll use the square of the position 0. And of course, we all still know this expression from high school. It will produce a parabola. Now, fortunately, the theory part is over, and we'll put the new knowledge into use. I'll create a new composition and call it stroke. And I'll just do what I explained in theory, I'll now do in practice. So I'll create a new solid, call it stroke, and use the write-on effect in After Effects, which produces a brush stroke. Now I'll animate the brush position with an expression, and to do this I'll alt-click on the stopwatch next to the brush position, go over here, press U to isolate the animated properties of the layer only, meaning the ones that are keyframed or that have expressions applied to it, and I'll write a short expression. I'll have to split my brush position into x and y. I can use any name for the variable. You can call it rabbit, I guess, but it's not very helpful, and the only words you can't use are the ones reserved by After Effects, for example value and time. You can't use those because they're reserved names in After Effects, and you have to come up with your own unique names for the variables. Fortunately, x is not a reserved name for a variable, so I can just call my x and y variables x and y whenever I want to. And for the x, we'll use time. Time is 1 per second. That's not very much, so I'll multiply it by 100. And for the y, I'll use x squared, so x times x. Those are the two array pieces that we have, and let's piece them back together to form this one array. And I'll open brackets and then put all the array pieces in the order that they're supposed to be stored, separated by commas. So x, comma, y, close the brackets, and hit the small enter key next to the numpad. What happens? We have a couple of dots that are racing down to the bottom of the screen. And that is because at frame 0, time is 0, 0 times 100 is 0, and 0 times 0 of course is 0 again. So we're at 0, 0. And after 1 second, we are already at 100 frames. 1 second times 100. And 10,000 frames down in the y. 10 10,000 pixels down in the Y. That's because 100 times 100 is 10,000, and that of course is way too fast. So let's slow this down by, say, divided by 20. And there we go, this looks a lot nicer. And let's decrease the brush spacing to make the resolution of the line a bit more visible, and also increase the brush size a little. There we go, we have a stroke. Now the stroke is animating from the top left corner to the bottom, and that is of course on a regular coordinate system on a piece of paper, the Cartesian one. Higher Y values mean that you're up higher in your coordinate system on your piece of paper. But in After Effects, higher Y values mean that your cursor travels down on the screen. So we can just invert this by putting a minus in front of it, and now of course it's gone. We could now type in plus 360 behind the Y value to lower my stroke down here. But that's not very flexible. There is a more elegant solution to that. So instead of the 360 that I'm adding to each of my Y values, I'm going to use the value over here that is stored in the Y value slider. And this is called by writing value. If I hit enter now, I get an error message. And that is, an array piece can't expand to more than one value. And that means our array piece is the Y, it's only one value, and our value is the value of the entire brush position array. So we can't add two variables in a container to one variable. And that's why we need to recall the second position of the value. And the second position is recalled, of course, by brackets 1 and brackets closed, because 0 is the first position. So value 1 in this case is the Y position slider of the brush position. And if I do this, I can use the brush position slider to move down my line. There we go. Now let's pick a more practical example about how to split your brush position. And I will use the most common expression in After Effects, and of course I'm talking about the wiggle. I make a new comp, call it wiggle, make a new solid, also call it wiggle, and use the write on effect again. Animate the brush position by alt-clicking on the stopwatch, press U down here, and just type in wiggle, and then your frequency. 10 means 10 times per second, and your amplitude 300 means 10 times per second I'll wiggle your value by 300 pixels. And if I scrub through here, I see a bunch of dots. I'll decrease the brush spacing so I can see a bunch of lines. It's neat, but it's not what we want. We want to wiggle the X and the Y values separately. And to do that, we have to split the array again. I'll call my first array position X and make it equal time, this time times 150, because 100 is not very fast. And I'll call the Y position again value, and only the second value position, plus wiggle 10, 300. But if I hit enter now, I will get the same error message that I can't expand one piece of array. And that is because the wiggle realizes I'm wiggling a two-dimensional array, so I have to return two values in an array. And of course, to my Y piece, I can't add an entire array, so I'll just take the second position of the wiggle and terminate my line by a semicolon again, and piece together the array X, Y, brackets closed, and hit the small enter key by the numpad. And here you see I have the wiggle line. It's too deep, it's way too far down, so I'll decrease the Y position. That's why I already installed the handle. Increase the brush size so it looks a little nicer, and we see it's traveling over the screen over time because of the x equals times 150, and it wiggles in y. All nice. What if we want the wiggle to stop after a while? The easiest way to do this is to use a slider control. A slider control does nothing so far. All it does, it gives you a value that you can keyframe and of course recall using expressions. For example, after 100 frames, I want my my wiggle amplitude to be 300, and after 150 frames I want my amplitude to be 0. Well, I should push keyframes first, so let's do that. Use 300, and now of course I have to tell the wiggle to use the keyframe value from the slider. For this I use the pick whip. I'll just mark the value I want to replace with the pick whip and use the pick whip to drag over here to the slider value, and you can see it starts out normally. Our stroke is wiggling, but after 100 frames the wiggle value will decrease. After 150 frames we have a flat line. Okay, for the last part of this tutorial I'll have a brief overview, quick demonstration of how to use After Effects expressions to analyze audio. For this I'll create a new comp and call it audio, and I will drop my audio file into this comp, right click on it and say Keyframe Assistant Convert Audio to Keyframes. This way After Effects will create a new null object that's called audio amplitude, and it will create 3 slider controls that store the information for the audio amplitude. If I twirl down the waveform over here, I can see the audio amplitude of my null object visually, and if I scrub through here I can see there's a very loud value at the beginning of the piece, and its value is roughly 30, and if we go down over here where it's more silent, our values drop down to 4 and 2 and even lower. So we keep in mind that the range that we're dealing with is 0 to 30 roughly. I'll delete the left and the right channels because they're just in the way. I won't use them in this example, and create a new solid, call it stroke again, because again we will use the write-on effect to demonstrate the use of the expression. I'll click on the brush position stopwatch, press U over here and pick whip the both channel slider. What I've done here is I pick whipped a single piece, one variable, into a brush position array, and what it does then is After Effects creates one single variable, calls it temp, and temp is exactly the slider value, and it fills the array using temp, temp, which means that both the x and the y will be the same and they will be the slider value. And what that means is visible when I go over here and have a look. From the upper left corner I have a diagonal line down from 0 to 30. 0, 0 to 30, 30, because x and y are the same. And this is of course not what I wanted. So what I'll do now is I'll exchange the temp by y. I have a new expression for the x, time times, for variety's sake, let's make this 151. And as before, I still want to be able to have a little control over my y value, so I'll type in value 1, of course. And since in After Effects higher y values mean lower position on the screen, I will not add the audio amplitude but subtract it from my value. And alright, I forgot, we still have temp here, and of course After Effects doesn't know what temp is, so x, y, and we are producing a line that's analyzing the audio. Okay, I want to move this way down to the bottom, 710, because from the value it only goes up, so I can move it to the very bottom and still am not out of screen. The peak is very low, so let's multiply this by 10 and decrease the brush spacing. Okay, usually in the very most of the cases, this value that they get from the pick whip will only be your basis. You will transform it further. For example, if you want to increase the range, then you can multiply it by 10, and if you want the higher values to have a bigger impact on your expression than the lower values, you can square it, or you can decrease the impact by dividing it, for example, by 2. Let's check an example for that. I can use my expressions to animate everything that has a stopwatch. For example, the brush size. I'll click on the brush size and pick whip my slider value down here. And this way our overall stroke will have the size of the current slider value. And over here it's too thick for my taste, so I'll divide this by 2. Looks a little better, and the problem we have now is it can drop very low. 1.55 divided by 2 is under 1, so the brush stroke is less than 1 pixel wide. We don't see it anymore. I can prevent this by adding a 1. So the 1 is my basis for the stroke. It's the minimum thickness. Everything else will be added to the 1, so it will be higher than 1 at all times. If I do a RAM preview of this, you can see my brush stroke animates over time, and also the thickness. Okay, let's check out one more useless example that hopefully helps to understand audio analyzation. I'll use this tool here to create a star. Here we go, it's a star, and if I twirl down the Polystar path options of this star, I can see that all of the Polystar path attributes have a stopwatch next to them, so I can animate them. For example, I can take the number of points. That's the number of rays that the sun thing has. It goes down to 3, all the way up to, I don't know, but a lot. And I'll just use an expression by alt-clicking on the points, and now we see we're running out of space. And there's a simple trick that you can avoid this lack of overview. I can lock over here the audio amplitude. That means no matter where I click over here, the effects of the audio amplitude will stay in this window. So if I'm still editing my points, I can just use the pick whip to drag over the slider value, and now my points are linked to the audio control. And this looks kind of funky, but there's more that we can animate with the audio. I'll show you one last example. I can use the hue and saturation effect in order to colorize my star, and the colorize hue will affect in a radius, meaning from 0 to 360, and my slider range is only from 0 to 30. And if I alt-click on the stopwatch, I can just copy paste this, Control C and then Control V, and I have the same expression. I don't have to look for my pick whip, and you can see it only animates 1/12 of the range, because 0 to 30 is 1/12 of the 0 to 360. So I'll just multiply this by 12 and we're good to go. There we go. Another useless feature animated, and this concludes the audio expression part of my tutorial. If you like this tutorial, let me know, leave a comment. and I'm sure I can produce a follow-up where I can go more into detail of expressions and showing you more advanced functions of linking audio to video, and create some custom tools that are really handy in everyday use. So thanks for watching. This was Frederik Steinmetz for aetutsplus.com, and I hope I'll see you next time. Goodbye.